Welcome to the Creepy Cozy Book Nook, where together we explore tales that tickle your spine, scratch your brain, or warm your icy soul. As we all know, classic movies from our childhoods were often birthed from very different, very morbid books and fables from generations ago. Cinderella, Pinocchio, The Little Mermaid, all examples of stories of different eras, often with different moral messages, cleaned up for the modern palate. Today, we asked the question, what if Toy Story was very loosely based on such a story? Not a contemporary, colorful story of friendship, but rather a dated tale of black magic, twisted morality, and unfettered revenge. Grab your favorite hot drink, a plate of cookies, and let's dive into the world of the Straw Cowboy. At the twilight of the 19th century, in a plantation manor in Tennessee, lived the Davis family. There was 6-year-old Andrew, his 3-year-old little sister Bonnabelle, and their mother Jenny. Andrew Sr. died shortly after Bonnabelle's birth, but left his family with a very comfortable life. Between generational plantation wealth and a very lucrative ranch over in Texas, Jenny and the kids didn't want for much in the material realm. While there was no father in the picture, Jenny would regularly have new gentlemen coming and going. A wealthy and beautiful woman had no trouble finding men, but the quality of the men she attracted was questionable. It should come as little surprise, though. As for all her external beauty, Jenny was a greedy, cold woman. The only thing she loved more than her jewels and trinkets was her wine. The same wine she'd have on her breath when shouting at her 2 kids for this thing or that. On the morning of Andrew's 7th birthday, the kids awoke to the excited squealing of their mother at the front door. They rushed to the window, peering out at the courtyard to see what had happened. A large, well-kept man with a pencil mustache and a top hat was standing with his arms open. Jenny ran as fast as she could and leapt into his arms. The children had met Mr. Bell on 1 or 2 occasions, and neither of them cared much for him. He was oily and smelled of rich tobacco. They did, however, like that he was a toy manufacturer, because it meant he was gone for long periods of time. And while they didn't mind receiving toys regularly to keep them busy, they tended to not play with them all that much. No, they each had their own favorites that their father bought them. Bonnabelle's was a lovely porcelain shepherdess, and Andrew's was a straw cowboy doll with a little red hat on. The doll reminded him of his father, from the way it was dressed to the way it spoke, in his imagination, of course. Andrew spent nearly every waking moment with that little straw man, but knew well to take out all the other toys Mr. Bell had given them whenever he was over, or his mother would be very displeased. It was, as a matter of fact, this exact thing that Andrew forgot that very day, a mistake that would change the Davis family forever. Jenny rushed upstairs after seeing Mr. Bell in and demanded that the children get dressed in their Sunday finest at once. Andrew helped Bonnabelle get dressed first and put a bow in her bushy, curly blonde hair before dressing himself. He made sure to part his hair in the exact manner his mother preferred it. Bonnabelle looked too scared to go down and held the little shepherdess tightly to her chest. Andrew felt awful, because her fears weren't unfounded, but finally managed to convince her to leave the doll behind before going downstairs. Delaying the inevitable would only make it worse. Staying on his mother's good side was always the safest approach, especially when his sister was involved. As they entered the foyer, they were greeted by a busy house staff rushing to get everything ready for the big party. It was like this for as long as Andrew could remember. Once there was any excuse for a party to be held, his mother would latch onto it and turn it into a big event. All the wealthy plantation and business owners in the region would leave their children at home and eat and drink until they lost all sense of themselves. It would become, in every possible aspect, Jenny's party. Andrew knew the spiel by heart. The guests would arrive, bringing gifts in the afternoon. They'd have an early dinner at the big table with wine by the gallon, and then him and Bonnabelle would be sent to bed before the sun set, so the adults could do whatever it is adults do. And if they were lucky, they'd get to sleep through it and not be thrown around by an uncontrollably drunk mother once the guests left. This was the cycle, month after month, year after year. Andrew didn't mind being sent to his room, though. He knew there he and Bonnabelle would have a few hours uninterrupted to tell each other ghost stories and play with their toys, the toys they wanted to play with. The morning and afternoon played out exactly as expected. A bunch of folks showed up dressed to the nines with expensive but uninteresting gifts for Andrew and his family. The kids sat quietly on the staircase, welcoming guests and thanking them for coming. They moved to the lounge where the kids were allowed to sit at their fireplace opening presents. After each gift, Jenny gave Andrew a threatening look as her way of telling him to perform an overly enthusiastic show of appreciation. He received 2 toy trains, one from Mr. and Mrs. Weathers and another from old Mrs. Socks, a rocking horse that he was just about too big for from Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, and a Noah's Ark toy from Mr. Frog, who made a big show about him bringing it over from Germany himself. Mrs. Teller brought an old piggy bank with a top hat that resembled Mr. Bell so much that Andrew and Bonnabelle had to stifle their laughter or risk a beating once the guests left. Mr. Bell gave his gift last, an intricately made soldier doll, complete with a small cast iron rifle. Mr. Bell said, with a very troubling infliction, that Andrew could finally throw away that old raggedy cowboy doll. He flinched at the suggestion, but his mother's gritted teeth stopped him from responding with anything but a forced, "Thank you, sir." At first he was excited about the toy, but Mr. Bell's suggestion put Andrew off it immediately. The smell of meat and the sound of the table being set disrupted the tense moment, and the kids were sent to put their toys in their room before washing up for the meal. Dinner was served and consisted of a Waldorf salad, pea soup, a venison roast, and several tarts and baked Alaska for dessert. Andrew wanted chicken pie, but he didn't fuss. The adults had already finished several bottles of wine by the time their dessert plates were being collected by the staff. The kids were waiting anxiously to be sent to their room to go play, especially once Mr. Fisher started touching Bonnabelle's hair far too much, something Jenny conveniently never seemed to notice. Several more bottles of wine were placed on the table, and the staff left for their quarters, taking the kids up to a very clearly stumbling Jenny. She grabbed a bottle of wine off the table to carry with her as she pulled Andrew up by his sleeve. Andrew grabbed Bonnabelle's hand to make sure she left with him too. As they passed through the foyer and entered the staircase, 3 immensely loud knocks rang at the front door. It was dark out. All the usual guests were already inside, and the staff wouldn't dare knock that brazenly with Jenny in the house. Jenny shot her head towards the door, scowling. She let go of Andrew's shirt, leaving the children on the first step, and swung open the door. Just beyond, drenched of rain that wasn't there a second ago, stood an old, crouched woman, covered in a black cloak, made up of what seemed to be old tattered rags. Jenny recoiled at the sight of such a pathetic-looking creature daring to step foot at her door.
"My apologies for disturbing your festivities, miss,"
the old woman croaked in a low voice that somehow carried throughout the entire foyer.
"but I was taking a walk and I couldn't help smelling something that made my old bones cool with pleasure. I was hoping you'd be so kind as to share some of your meal with an old woman such as myself."
Jenny, due to a combination of disgust and being at the end of several bottles of French wine, took a moment to process the request. Her confusion, as most of her stronger emotions, soon turned to rage.
"Listen here, you old dog.
Jenny started.
How dare you bring your filth to my front door? What on earth could you even have thought would happen? That I'd fix you a platter of venison and a goblet of wine, carry it to you like some gutless slave?"
The old woman didn't flinch.
"I'd be happy with a morsel of bread, miss, but I would never dare part you in your precious wine."
The old woman's eyes were hidden in the shade of her hood, but Andrew could tell she was glancing at the bottle in Jenny's white-knuckled hand. Jenny, drunk as she was, managed to understand she was being called out.
You know what? Why not? Why not have some wine?
Jenny slurred before pulling back her arm. Bonnabel flinched, and Andrew could swear the old woman smirked with a sense of victory. Jenny flung the bottle at the old woman's head with all her might, grunting as she threw her arm forward. A sound akin to a whip echoed through the foyer, and, in less than a blink of an eye, the old woman's hand had shot out from under her cloak, catching the bottle. Every member of the Davis family was equally stunned. The old woman flipped the bottle without spilling a drop, and then handed it back to Jenny, who took it gently with her mouth still hanging open.
Thank you kindly for your generosity, Miss Davis, but I think I've gotten what I needed.
The old woman bowed deeply, before turning around and shuffling away, slowly into the dark. Mr. Bell had heard the commotion and came running in. Jenny was blubbering, clearly at a loss. He shut the door before taking her back towards the dining room. As they passed the kids, he scowled at them.
Get yourselves to bed, now!
They obeyed, heading straight to their room without washing up. Once in their room, Andrew ran towards the window, hoping to get a glance of the strange old woman. He couldn't see much through the pouring rain, but he was certain he could see a tattered black robe and two small white eyes peering at him from the tree line. The children put on their pajamas, and Andrew tucked Bonnabel into bed. He dimmed their bedside lantern. They both tried, but failed, to fall asleep between the party noise echoing from downstairs and the thought of the strange, unsettling woman who visited them. How did she do that? And how did she know their family name? By the time Bonnabel got fussy and started crying, the thoughts fell from Andrew's mind. He hopped out of bed and pulled out his toy chest. At the top of the pile was the new soldier toy. He pulled his nose up at it. It really was rather neat, but he didn't want to like it. To him, it represented villainy. He put it onto Bonnabel's bed. She wiped her teary eyes and sat up, curious about what was coming next. He took out the piggy bank that so resembled Mr. Bell. He then took the porcelain doll that stood on the mantelpiece and put it into his sister's hands before running back to the fireplace and rubbing his fingers in some soot. Andrew used the soot to draw a pencil mustache onto the pig's face, and both kids laughed, covering the sounds with their hands. Andrew wiped his dirty finger on his blue nightgown before grabbing the pig in one hand and the soldier in another.
What terrible crime shall we commit today, Mr. Belly?
Andrew said as the soldier, shaking it as he spoke.
I don't know, Major Bad, but I sure am hungry for lamb chops.
He growled as Mr. Belly, turning both toys towards the shepherdess in Bonnabel's hands.
No, don't eat my babies.
Bonnabel exclaimed a little too loudly. Andrew shushed her, and she put her tiny index finger over her lips before repeating in a quieter voice.
Don't eat my lambs, please.
I don't know, Miss Peep. We sure are hungry,
said Mr. Bed.
Yeah, starving. What should we cook up if we can't have any lamb? Perhaps we can have some shepherdess pie,
growled Mr. Belly, leaving Bonnabel gasping.
Please, please, won't somebody save me?
Miss Peep cried. Andrew leaned Mr. Bad against Mr. Belly and dug into his toy box. Bonnabel smiled knowingly and started hopping up and down with excitement. Andrew reached the bottom of the box where he hid his cowboy doll in a handkerchief and unfurled him. Andrew slammed the cowboy down between Miss Peep and the evil duo.
If you're so hungry, why don't I cook us up some pork chops instead?
Andrew said as the straw-stuffed cowboy.
Sheriff Stroy!
The villain screamed quietly. Bonnabel squealed and clapped her hands. The two of them played and played, their concerns downstairs far from their minds. It wasn't long before Andrew had forgotten about the two white eyes staring at him from the tree line, or Mr. Fisher subtly smelling his fingers after playing with Bonnabel's curls. Time seemed to disappear, and the increasingly heavy rainfall drowned out any potential disruptions. Unfortunately for the children, They never heard the front door of the manor close as the final guest left, nor did they hear 2 sets of feet pounding up the stairs and the drunken, flirtatious giggles that accompanied them. Nor did they hear or see the door opening behind them. And, most unfortunately of all, they didn't see 2 pairs of bloodshot eyes staring at them, their suit-covered nightgowns, their unflattering impression of Mr. Bell as a mustachioed pig, and the sight of a defeated Mr. Bad laying tossed across the room with his arm broken off. Jenny and Mr. Bell, however, did see it. All of it. The first moment the kids did notice the pair was as Mr. Bell was barreling towards Andrew, who couldn't jump away in time to avoid a balled fist to his cheek. Andrew couldn't make out much of what happened next, but could smell something much stronger than wine on Mr. Bell's breath, as well as feel every slap and kick that kept him down. He found a moment to look up at Bonnabelle to see if she was okay, but only saw his mom repeatedly slapping the little screaming girl behind Mr. Bell's 2 thick legs. He reached out to grab Sheriff Stroy and held it up between him and his attacker, but the doll just limply hung in the boy's viciously shaking hand. Mr. Bell snatched the doll out of the boy's hand, slammed the nearest window open, and flung it out as hard as he could, while shouting something about ungrateful bastard worms. Andrew looked up through the only eye he could open at his mother, praying for help. She looked at him and, for a split second, Andrew was certain he saw a semblance of regret. That look changed into one of resentment, however. The beating continued for another moment or 2 before Mr. Bell was completely winded. He rubbed his palm over his sweaty hair to flatten it and walked out with Jenny's shoulder in his hand. Bonnabelle was sobbing in the corner when the door shut. Andrew rushed to comfort her first, before limping to the window to see where his precious toy had landed. When he looked out to the courtyard, he didn't see any sign of the little cowboy. He did, however, see a figure in a black cloak, slowly walking towards a tree line with a trail of straw slowly falling behind it. The sun had risen by the time the old woman made it back to her land, but that deep into the thicket of the swamps, the light of the sun wouldn't shine for another few hours at the earliest. She stepped through the final of many brushes, bushes, and waterlogged trees that hid her hovel, marked by a small wooden trinket tied to a branch. Once through, her home was in sight, a small, dilapidated wooden cottage with a single window no larger than a soapbox. Her entire yard was ankle-deep with swamp water and covered with gigantic roots and trees, with the only source of light being from a single candle in the window that didn't seem to twitch with the passing wind. As the woman approached, the door opened to her all by itself and promptly shut itself behind her. Inside was a single square room with a dirty kitchen to the left, a small round table with a single stool in the center, and a reading nook where she'd sleep amongst 2 packed bookcases to the right.
Light!
She said in her abnormally broad, cracking voice to several candles scattered around the cottage. They obeyed, and their wicks all lit up at once. A gas stove with a pot of pungent tea lit up as well, and a dirty mug made its way towards it, bobbing impatiently waiting for it to boil. The woman pulled off her cloak and dropped it to the floor. The moment it touched the floor, it scurried up the wall and draped itself over a wooden hook the woman clearly carved herself. Underneath, she had been hiding 2 arms covered in black ink markings with all manner of shapes and sigils, and a head of frizzy, long, white hair tied in a crude knot. Her eyes were as deep set into her face as her cheeks were. It would be hard to guess her age, and impossible to verify, as she herself had lost count at that point. She thought for a moment that she had forgotten something and looked around, confused. The cloak on the hook seemed to notice and spat out the Straw Cowboy from one of its sleeves, and the woman caught it. She commanded the table to move away, and in doing so it revealed a small trap door which flung open. A fine green mist arose from the secret cellar. The woman inhaled deeply through her crooked nose with a look of glee, and she went down the stairs. Underneath was a single bathtub-sized cauldron. It was boiling without a fire. The green bubbling contents were glowing brightly enough to light the entire cellar, which was otherwise home to nothing but a few cupboards filled with jars, cans, and pots, stuffed with all kinds of nasty contents. The woman looked at her prized potion with pride. Of anybody alive today, or at any time before, she alone knew the contents of that pot. And out of anybody alive today, she was the only breathing being to know what it was for, and how it has been used. That pot and that very same potion had been brewing before the first greedy prospector laid his axe to pick stone, looking for gold. That same pickaxe would somehow slip one fateful day and lay that prospector flat where he stood. That potion was there before the first banker opened up shop in the town of Darling, just east of the swamps, ready to swindle unknowing folks out of their bread money. Somehow, that banker would be crushed by a 2-ton vault door that seemingly shut itself on its master. That potion was there before the end of the war, when one of the last slave traders was found in his bed, seemingly whipped to death by his own whip. Yes, the old witch of the swamps was there before it all, back when the ancient trees and plants that covered her abode were saplings and seeds, before greed covered the land and begged for someone to cut it short. The witch's potent pungent potion would see to that, to what the outlanders called karma. She'd only have to trade a few drops of her stew for a gallon of blood. But with a life committed to cleansing through death, there comes an inevitable darkening of the soul. The witch had grown sadistic and cruel. Whatever line she had drawn for herself in the past was long since overstepped. And why wouldn't she? She was doing it all for the right reasons, no? She brushed off the ounce of remaining scent she had as she stuck her fingertips into the piping hot cauldron, her skin sizzling. She pulled her fingers out and splashed a few drops of the potion on the limp, lifeless little cowboy.
Little doll discarded by hate, come alive and hear your fate. A greedy mother, a soul all torn, make her wish she was never born. Take away all she has won by ending her daughter and her son. Assure the dog will get her day by burning all she won't give away. And when death is all she craves, bury her beside the children's graves.
The limp straw doll twitched to life. At first, it arose slowly, one limb at a time. But then it kicked and sputtered manically.
Calm yourself and obey!
The witch groaned, and the doll stopped fighting.
Feisty little thing you are. Excellent. Take that spirit and do as I say.
She gently placed the doll on its feet, and it inspected itself curiously. The witch whistled, and after a moment an old cut-throat razor dropped down the stairs and jumped right into the sheriff's strawy hands.
Make it messy,
the witch said with an upsettingly white grin. Strawy took a moment, looking at the witch and then the blade. There was understanding, a sense of purpose. That purpose made its way to his feet and drove him up the stairs and out the door and into the swamp. It took Strawy and the blade the entire day and part of that evening to make it back to the Davis Manor. Aside from having to tread through sharp bushes and deep marshes with 4-inch-long legs, he also had a run-in with an especially territorial squirrel. It managed to yank out a good chunk of straw through his neck, but the blade got most of its tail when it squealed and ran off. A convenient stable nearby provided a place to rest and enough hay to refill his body. He fashioned a sling from the blade's fluffy tail trophy and used it to carry the blade on his back. The horses in the stable watched curiously as the little toy stuffed their food into his shoulder. but they didn't seem to mind sharing. The rest of the way was easier but uninteresting, with the exception of a few humans driving by on horses or carriages. Stroy would simply fall down limply on the roadside, and everybody seemed too busy with their daily lives to stop and inspect a mud-covered ragdoll. When the animated duo finally arrived, midnight had already passed, and the only lights on in the manor were the gas lights by the front patio. Stroy recognized the house, but he wasn't sure if it was a memory or if it was just the will of the witch, the same will that made him simply know where he had to go. The thought of what he was, why he was, and why he was doing what he was doing left him standing a bit too long in the moonlit courtyard. The cutthroat blade clicked open and closed impatiently, snapping Stroy out of his very forbidden thoughts. They had a job to do, and now was the time to do it. He ran to a pillar on the corner of the patio closest to the children's bedroom window. After some struggling, he figured out he could grab a whip-like branch from a nearby bush, throw it around the pillar, and pull himself up to the landing above. When he finally made it up, he leapt up to the window and peered through. He saw two little bundles in two little beds, separated by a bedside table that stood over a toy box. Stroy felt something looking at those little bundles, one with a foot sticking out of the bottom and the other with bushy blonde hair sticking out of the top. The feeling was cut short by a little voice in his head that said,
Do it.
He composed himself and came up with a plan. He'd knock at the window and crouch underneath. Then as soon as Andrew... The boy stuck his head through the window to see what was going on. He'd slice through his neck. Then he'd leap in and get the girl too. He took the knife off his back and it unfurled itself slowly and quietly. Stroy put his back to the small bit of wall underneath the window, lifted the blade above his head, and rapped at the window. They listened for any sign of movement. Nothing. He rapped again, and again. After the fourth time, he heard a bed creak. He lowered the blade, out of sight, and waited. The window opened.
Hello?
He heard the boy's voice call with a whisper. A moment passed. The boy's face slowly came peeking through overhead. The blade twitched in the sheriff's hands. And then Stroy saw it, shining in the moonlight, the boy's deep purple, swollen eye. He lowered the blade, but it twitched ever more anxiously. Without a thought, Stroy flung the blade off the landing, and it hit the wall on the way down, clanging loudly. Both Stroy and Andrew got startled and the boy looked down. Stroy instinctively went limp. The boy's battered face lit up like a wildfire. He turned around quickly to make sure his door was closed, then snatched up the toy and jumped into bed. He held it over his head, looking at it like it was a boulder-sized diamond, then hugged it tightly. Stroy laid there motionless, wrapped in the boy's arms as he fell asleep. He didn't understand what exactly he was feeling, but he knew at that moment that while he was around, no harm would ever come to these children again. Before the sun rose once again, Stroy had slipped out. He knew his absence was going to cause concern for Andrew, but if he stayed, he knew something much worse would transpire. If he failed to do the job the witch set out for him, she would surely send another. It is for that exact reason that his first goal was finding the cutthroat blade he lobbed into the yard. It didn't take long before, while sticking his head into a hedge, the sharp blade swung at him from inside, cutting across Stroy's mouth. Straw came peeling out, but the brave toy fought back. He grabbed a small stone and whacked at the knife's hinges until the blade and handle separated. The blade laid there motionless, clearly relieved of the strange life it was bestowed. Stroy left the handle, but strapped the blade to his back, knowing he'd need all the help he could get. With a now much lighter knife in tow, Stroy managed to make it to the swamp by early evening. To amuse himself on the way, he moved the new slit in his face around, trying to speak. The best he could manage was a strange guttural mumbling, accompanied by spattering straw. but it was a fun exercise nonetheless that took his mind off of the monumental task ahead. He managed to make it to the witch's cottage and snuck in through the window, singeing part of his leg on the candle that stood there. He peeked before leaping down and saw no sign of the witch. Next, he struggled to push the table that stood over the cellar door out of the way. It wouldn't budge, so he started hacking at its leg with his blade until it hopped into a corner in fear. Stroy felt some guilt, but more than that, he felt every single item in the entire cottage looking at him, even if there wasn't a single eye in sight. He expected them to do more to stop him, but he figured it wasn't what they were enchanted to do. He slid the blade into a small opening by the cellar door and jumped in the other end to force it open. It opened a few inches, and he jumped in before the cellar door widened and then shut forcefully, shattering the blade into pieces. Stroy grabbed the biggest piece of blade that made it down with him, roughly an inch long, and stuck it in his new mouth. He'd need both hands free for what he had planned. He gazed across his birthplace. It didn't feel like home at all. It felt wrong, uneasy, corrupted. His bravery was challenged most by the absolute quiet in the cellar. Every few seconds, a thick bubble would rise to the top of the cauldron and startle him, but he persevered. He found his way to one of the cabinets full with jars and vials and cans. He took a small vial that had a cork and emptied the contents onto the dirt floor. What looked like dozens of spider eyes poured out of the bottle. Next, he stacked increasingly larger bottles and cans around the cauldron, fashioning himself a staircase. He climbed up twice as one of the lids gave way under him and he fell into a swarm of dead flies. When he finally made it to the top, he stretched as high as he could, dipped the vial into the potion, and quickly sealed the top. The vial glowed like a little green lantern. Another bit of help on the way back home. But before he knew if his plans would work, he needed to test something. He pulled one of the dead flies from his jar and placed it on the ground. Then, he carefully tipped a single drop of the potion onto it. It didn't move. An incantation? He placed the knife in his mouth on the ground and began speaking. He said, straw flying through the air. He hoped the intent mattered more than the actual words. And so it did. The dead fly slowly started beating its wings, and it rose up. It zoomed around, faster than any fly ever did, over the cauldron, through Stroy's legs, towards the dark corner, and... faster than a bolt of lightning, faster than a ray of sun, faster than a thought, two bony, white, ink-covered arms had shot from the dark corner and crushed the fly between the palms. Then they froze.
Itty-bitty cowboy with his itty-bitty flask and his itty-bitty hat and his itty-bitty knife.
The witch's fractured voice came from every angle of the room. The two abnormally long arms slowly pulled back into the dark, disappearing.
Greedy itty-bitty toy stealing from his mummy.
Her voice came from right behind Stroy, and he spun around, looking at nothing.
What shall I do with an itty-bitty traitor built for punishment? Curse the floor to swallow him up? Curse the hat to rip off his head? Curse the straw in his body to tear him up from the inside? Or...
Her voice came from a different corner of the room with each question. The following came from right above.
Perhaps I shall punish him with my own bare hands.
Stroy leapt backwards as the witch shot like a bullet from the bottom of the floorboards, down where he stood. Her fist came down so fast that she was wrist deep in the dirt. She looked up at the trembling toy, her grin stretching to her ears and her deep eyes shining manically. She had to pull twice to get her hand free from the cratered floor, during which time Stroy started running to the only cover he could think of, the unlit fire pit under the cauldron. He snatched up his knife as he ran and threw it behind him just in time. The witch had leapt at him with both hands and the blade had struck her in the eye. giving him time to make it under the massive cauldron. The witch laughed in several overlapping voices as she grabbed at her bloody face to try and pull out the blade. Story knew he had to act fast. The cauldron's legs stood high enough that the witch's arms could easily slip underneath. He opened the vial he was still carrying, dropped a bit too much of the potion into his Story hand, and rubbed it onto the bottom of the cauldron above. The blade fell by the witch's feet, accompanied by a modest stream of falling, dark blood. The witch went prone and stared right at him. Her eye was gushing blood now. Her voice, for the first time, was normal. Sad, even.
It always hurts the most when you're betrayed by your own.
There was a moment of stillness. The cauldron bubbled away above. The green vapor in the room calmed down, and then, when Story moved not even an inch, the witch leapt forward like a frog, screaming. Both hands nearly got him as he rolled backwards and out from underneath the cauldron. He shouted at the cauldron, and all three of his legs swung out from underneath it. It fell like a boulder, crushing the witch's arms underneath it. She screamed again, and it sounded like the swamp itself was crying out in pain. This went on for a few minutes, and then silence. The sheriff collected his thoughts before leaving. He gave one last look at the witch's dead body before leaving through the cellar door, which swung open for him at once. The cups and pots and table and stool and hooks and candles and books and cupboards all stared at him as he walked out of the front door undeterred, vial in hand. It was with great fortune that Story found Mr. Bell's carriage standing outside the manor courtyard the following evening. He sat in a tree and waited, watching the carriage driver smoke from a long pipe and make conversation with some of the manor servants before they all retired to their quarters for the night. The driver fell asleep with his hat covering his face on the driver's seat. Story shimmied onto a branch that stood right over the carriage, and he leapt off with a quiet thud. He searched the sleeping driver for a knife, but instead he found a small, snub-nosed revolver. No doubt they must cross some dangerous paths in their travels, but as they say, most accidents happen close to home. He hooked his arm through the trigger guard and carried it towards the front door. He splashed a bit of the potion onto the front door, which opened for him at once, before locking behind him after he entered. He wasn't leaving until the job was done. With great determination, the little straw man made his way up the stairs and into the children's bedroom. He was feeling mighty lonely and thought it good to finally make some friends. Mr. Bell and Mrs. Davis lay snoring in the main bedchambers, which was on the other side of the manor. Mr. Bell was having a dream about a burlesque show, except every dancer had his father's face. Mrs. Davis had no dreams at all, which she had no problem with, as she intentionally drowned them in wine, just as she had done with her feelings of sadness or guilt or remorse. She had so successfully drowned them out that she didn't feel half a dozen set of tiny feet and one set of tiny pig hooves climb into her bed, stealing a pillow right from under her. What did finally wake her, however, was the feeling of something being draped around her neck.
Not now, Albert.
She mumbled, but whatever it was started pulling a bit tighter. Then tighter still. She opened her eyes, and they took a moment to adjust to a person standing on the far side of the room. Wait, no. He wasn't standing far away. He was standing inches away. And he was no person, but rather the little cowboy that her husband once gave to her children. And he was pulling as hard as he could on one end of a bathrobe belt. Her consciousness finally caught up with her. She erupted into a panic. She shot her head to the right and saw the other end being pulled by a petite blonde porcelain doll and a piggy bank. She tried to scream, but the belt was already too tight. She gargled, looking beyond the pig for help from her pencil-mustachioed paramour, but found him with his hands tied and a pillow being pulled tightly over his head by a dozen tiny pairs of animals, and a few little porcelain sheep. The last thing she saw, as she desperately tried to get a grip on the belt around her neck, was a very expensive-looking toy soldier standing on the headrest of the bed, lowering the tip of a snub-nosed revolver into the pillow on Mr. Bell's face. A single muffled shot rang out, and Mr. Bell went limp. Her vision faded on a strange green light, softly bouncing against the walls. At the dawn of the 20th century, in a plantation-turned-ranch in Tennessee, lived the Davis family. There was 8-year-old Andrew, his 5-year-old little sister Bonnabelle, their mother Jenny, and their stepfather Albert Bell. On the morning of Andrew's 9th birthday, the kids awoke to the smell of fresh bacon and eggs. Andrew jumped out of bed and got dressed as fast as he possibly could. He couldn't wait to don his new boots and cowboy hat that he had received from Albert as an early birthday present. He rushed to his sister's room and found she was already up too. The two children rushed downstairs as fast as they could and found their mother and stepfather standing in the foyer, arms open and smiles broad. The children jumped into their arms and they all shared a long hug before being led outside. There, Andrew's gift stood, a beautiful brown foal, calmly enjoying some hay in the stable. 2 years ago, Andrew awoke to his mother and Mr. Bell acting strangely, kindly even. The servants were treated well. His sister had her hair brushed daily. They could play with any toys they wanted, and their mother had the cellar emptied of every ounce of wine. They also never had to sit through another lavish party again. In fact, Andrew overheard at school that Mr. Fisher had choked to death on his own toothbrush. Life was good, really good. Sure, he thought it was strange that his mother always wore a scarf, even in the warm summers. And yes, it was peculiar that Mr. Bell never took off his top hat, even when sleeping. He could also do without their icy cold skin when they gave him hugs and kisses every morning. But strangeness started to seem normal to him. Why, he didn't even flinch when he woke up in the middle of the night and could swear he saw his toy cowboy and toy soldier smoking pipe tobacco on the windowsill. The end.